Chapter 1. The night he heard her scrumpy bruise on Elena's cheekbone had turned the color of old wine by the time the sun set. She pressed a damp cloth against it, wincing as the cold fabric met swollen skin, and wondered distantly if this time he'd broken something. Her husband's rage had been worse tonight, something about the butcher's bill, or perhaps the way she'd looked at him across the dinner table. The reasons didn't matter anymore. They never had. She stood at the kitchen window of their narrow townhouse, watching fog roll through the cobblestone streets of Ashford. The city had grown darker in recent months, its gaslights flickering like dying stars. People spoke in whispers about disappearances, about bodies found drained in alleyways, about the old families who lived in the estates beyond the city walls and never walked in daylight. But Elena had larger monsters to fear than the ones in rumors. The front door slammed, her hands stilled on the cloth. She knew that sound, the particular violence of it, the way the hinges rattled in their frame. Thomas was home early from the tavern, and he was drunk. She could hear his uneven footsteps in the hall, the scrape of his boots against the floorboards, the muttered curses that meant he was working himself into another fury. Elena? His voice cracked through the house like a whip. She set down the cloth and smoothed her skirts with trembling fingers. In the kitchen, he appeared in the doorway, all red-faced rage and stale gin. His cravat hung loose, his waistcoat unbuttoned. He was handsome, her husband, or had been once, before drink and cruelty had carved new lines into his face. The man she'd married 3 years ago, desperate and naive and fleeing her father's debts, had vanished into this creature of violence and contempt. "You embarrass me," he said, moving toward her with the careful, predatory steps of a man who knew his power. At the tavern, Johnson asked after you said you looked poorly at market yesterday. Said you had bruises. Elena's throat went dry. I said nothing to anyone. You don't need to say anything. Your face says it for you. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the tender flesh above her elbow. Makes me look weak. Makes them think I can't control my own wife. Thomas, please. The first blow caught her across the mouth. She tasted copper and salt, felt her lips split against her teeth. The second sent her stumbling against the kitchen table, her hip striking the corner with enough force to send a pot clattering to the floor. She tried to curl away, to make herself small, but his hands were everywhere, yanking her hair, shoving her down, his voice a constant stream of venom. She screamed. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't a call for help, because no help would come. The neighbors had learned long ago to close their windows when Thomas came home drunk. But something primal in her chest forced the sound out, a raw, desperate cry that tore from her throat and filled the small kitchen with its echo. Thomas's hand closed around her neck. Shut up. Each word was punctuated with pressure, his thumb pressing against her windpipe. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. The room tilted. She clawed at his wrist, but his grip only tightened, and she thought with strange clarity, this is how I die. In my own kitchen. Over a butcher's bill. Then the window shattered. Glass exploded inward in a spray of glittering fragments. A figure moved through the opening with inhuman speed, dark coat billowing like wings. Thomas's hand left her throat as he was wrenched backward, his body slamming against the far wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Elena collapsed to the floor, gasping, her vision swimming. Through the haze, she saw him, the intruder, though that word felt inadequate for what stood in her kitchen. He was tall and lean, dressed in black from his high collar to his polished boots. His face was angular and aristocratic, skin pale as marble in the lamplight. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, his eyes were the color of smoke and old steel, and they burned with a fury that made Thomas's rage look like a child's tantrum. You will not touch her again, he said, and his voice was soft, cultured, but threaded with something ancient and absolutely deadly. Thomas scrambled to his feet, all his brutish confidence evaporating. Who the hell? This is my house, my wife. The stranger moved. One moment he stood by the window. The next he was in front of Thomas, one pale hand wrapped around her husband's throat, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing at all. Thomas's feet kicked uselessly in the air. Your wife, the stranger repeated, tilting his head. Does that give you the right to break her? To strangle her in her own home? Please, Thomas wheezed, his face purpling. Please, I'm sorry. You didn't know someone was listening? The stranger's smile was terrible. But you knew what you were doing. You've done it before. Many times. Elena watched from the floor, too stunned to move. The stranger's hand hadn't tightened. Thomas was held in place by nothing more than the grip at his throat, but there was something impossibly strong about those fingers. something that made her think of iron bars and locked doors. I could kill you, the stranger said conversationally. It would be easier than breathing, but death is too clean for men like you. He leaned closer until his face was inches from Thomas's. So instead, you will pack a bag tonight and leave this house. You will never return to Ashford. And if I ever hear that you've laid hands on another woman, I will find you, and I will make you beg for the mercy of death. Do you understand? Thomas managed a jerky nod. The stranger released him. Thomas crumpled to the floor, coughing and gasping, then scrambled to his feet and fled out of the kitchen, through the house. The sound of his panicked footsteps fading into the night, silence fell, broken only by Elena's ragged breathing. The stranger turned to her, and his expression shifted, the fury draining away, replaced by something almost gentle. He crossed the kitchen and knelt beside her, moving with careful, deliberate slowness. Are you badly hurt? He asked. Elena stared at him. Up close, he was even more unsettlingly beautiful, too still, his eyes reflecting lamplight like an animal's. She touched her split lip, felt the swelling around her throat where Thomas's fingers had been. I don't know, she whispered. He reached toward her face, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air. May I? The question surprised her. She nodded, his fingers were cool against her chin as he tilted her head, examining the damage with clinical precision. His touch was astonishingly gentle, nothing like Thomas's brutal hands, nothing like any touch she'd known in years. You'll bruise, he said quietly, but nothing's broken. You were fortunate. His eyes met hers. I was passing when I heard your scream. Thank you, Elena managed. The words felt absurdly inadequate. He rose gracefully to his feet and extended a hand to help her up. She took it, expecting warmth, but his palm was cold, and when she stood, she realized he was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You cannot stay here, he said. When the shock fades, he may return. Men like that always do. I have nowhere to go. The stranger studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. Then he inclined his head. You do now, he said. Come with me. And despite every instinct, screaming that she was stepping from one danger into another, Elena found herself nodding, because whatever the stranger was, and some deep, primal part of her already knew he wasn't human. He had stopped when he heard her scream, and that was more than anyone else had ever done. Chapter 2. The house beyond the Fogelena followed him through streets she'd known all her life, yet they felt strange now, transformed by fog and darkness into something from a fever dream. The stranger moved ahead of her with fluid grace, his dark coat barely stirring in the cold wind that made her shiver. He hadn't told her his name. She hadn't asked. Her feet ached in her thin boots, and her throat throbbed where Thomas's fingers had pressed. But fear kept her moving, not fear of the man ahead, though perhaps it should have been. Fear of stopping. Fear of going back. Fear that if she hesitated for even a moment, her courage would shatter like the kitchen window, and she'd find herself back in that house, waiting for Thomas to return. They left the narrow streets of Ashford's working quarter behind, climbing the hill toward the old estates. Elena had never been to this part of the city. The houses here were older, grander, set back from the road behind iron gates and towering walls. No gaslights illuminated these streets, only the silver gleam of moonlight breaking through the fog. The stranger stopped before a gate wrought in intricate patterns of metal and thorn. Beyond it, a manor house loomed against the night sky, 3 stories of Gothic stone, its windows dark and empty as a dead man's eyes. This is your home? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. One of them. He touched the gate, and it swung open silently, despite its obvious age. I haven't been here in some time. It will be sparse, but safe. Safe. The word felt foreign on her tongue. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. They walked up a gravel path lined with neglected gardens. What had once been carefully maintained hedges now grew wild, reaching toward the house like grasping fingers. The front door was solid oak, its iron knocker shaped like a raven with spread wings. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old stone and something else, something Elena couldn't quite name. Spice, maybe, or incense long burned out. The stranger lit a lamp with a match struck against his thumbnail, and warm light spilled across a grand entrance hall. A staircase curved upward into darkness. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects' faces obscured by shadow and age. Wait here, he said, handing her the lamp. Then he moved into the darkness beyond with that same inhuman speed, leaving her standing alone in the vast, silent hall. Elena set the lamp on a dusty side table and wrapped her arms around herself. Now that she'd stopped moving, Reaction was setting in. Her hands trembled. Her breath came too fast. She'd left her home such as it was with a complete stranger, who'd thrown a grown man against a wall as easily as one might toss a rag doll. A stranger who moved like smoke, and whose hands were cold as corpses. What have I done? But then she remembered Thomas's fingers on her throat, the way the world had started to go dark, and she thought, nothing worse than staying would have been. The stranger returned, carrying blankets and what looked like a woman's dressing gown of dark blue silk, embroidered with silver thread. The style was outdated, something from decades past, but beautiful. The bedroom upstairs is habitable, he said, setting the items on a chair. The servants left quickly when the house was closed. Some of their belongings remain. He gestured to the dressing gown. That was my sister's. You may have it. Elena stared at him. In the lamplight, his features were even more striking: high cheekbones, a mouth that might have been sensual if it weren't set in such careful control, eyes that seemed to see through her skin to the bones beneath. Your sister? She asked. Something passed across his face, grief, perhaps, or memory worn smooth by time. She's been gone a long while. I'm sorry. He inclined his head in acknowledgement, then seemed to catch himself, as if remembering some social nicety he'd forgotten. I am Lucian, he said. Lucian Ashford. This house belonged to my family for many generations. Ashford, Elena repeated. Like the city. The city was named for us, long ago. His smile was brief and humorless. We built it, we protected it, and then he stopped, shook his head. That's a story for another time. You should rest. You've had a terrible night. Elena nodded, though rest felt impossible. Still, she took the dressing gown and followed Lucian up the curving staircase. The steps creaked beneath her weight, but made no sound under his feet, as if he weighed nothing at all. He led her to a bedroom at the end of a long hallway. Inside, furniture lay draped in white sheets like ghosts. Lucian pulled the coverings away to reveal a four-poster bed with elaborate carvings, a wardrobe of dark wood, a vanity with a tarnished mirror. There's a washroom through that door, he said, pointing. The water still runs, though it will be cold. I'll see about lighting a fire. You don't have to, I know. He met her eyes, and again that intensity struck her, not threatening exactly, but overwhelming. But you're hurt, and you're frightened, and those things matter. Even if you think they don't. Before she could respond, he was gone, moving back into the hallway with that unsettling speed. Elena sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. The mattress was soft beneath her, far softer than the thin pallet she'd shared with Thomas. She touched her throat gingerly, feeling the tender flesh, the ghost of her husband's grip. Then she looked at the dressing gown in her lap, silk so fine. It slipped through her fingers like water, embroidered with silver constellations she couldn't name. Whose house is this? Who is Lucian Ashford? And why did he move like something that didn't need to breathe? Through the window she could see fog rolling through the estate's overgrown gardens. Somewhere in the house below, she heard movement, quick, efficient, inhuman. Lucian laying a fire, or doing whatever mysterious things he did in the darkness of his ancestral home. She should be terrified. Some part of her was terrified, but another part, the part that had screamed in her kitchen, that had taken a stranger's cold hand and followed him through fog-shrouded streets, that part felt something else entirely. Relief, curiosity, and beneath it all, a question that whispered through her mind like wind through dead leaves. What is he? Elena rose and moved to the washroom. The water was indeed cold, but she scrubbed her face clean of tears and blood, examining the damage in the dim mirror. Her lip was swollen, her cheek mottled with bruises, but her eyes looked different. Alive perhaps, in a way they hadn't been for a very long time. When she returned to the bedroom, a fire crackled in the hearth, filling the room with warmth and dancing light. Lucian was nowhere to be seen. But on the bedside table, someone had left a glass of water and a note, written in elegant, old-fashioned script. You're safe here. Rest. We'll talk in the evening. Elena read the note 3 times, her finger tracing the words. In the evening. Not tomorrow. Not in the morning. In the evening. She looked toward the window, where the sky was just beginning to lighten with the approaching dawn, and felt the first cold finger of understanding trace down her spine. She'd been rescued by something that feared the sun. Chapter 3. The Truth in Shadow. Selena woke to darkness and disorientation, her heart hammering against her ribs. For one terrible moment, she thought she was back in the townhouse, that Thomas was standing over her, that the rescue had been nothing but a desperate dream conjured by a dying mind. Then she felt silk against her skin instead of rough cotton. Smelled wood, smoke and old stone instead of gin and sweat. And remembered, she sat up slowly, wincing as her bruised body protested. The fire had burned down to embers, casting barely enough light to see by. Beyond the window, night had fallen again full and complete, without even a hint of twilight. How long had she slept? A soft knock at the door made her flinch. May I enter? Lucian's voice muffled by the heavy wood. Yes, Elena said, pulling the blankets higher. Though she wore the borrowed dressing gown, he entered, carrying a tray laden with bread, cheese, cold meat, and fruit. The lamplight from the hallway silhouetted him, making it impossible to read his expression as he crossed to set the tray on a small table by the window. You slept through the day, he said. I thought you might be hungry. The mention of food made Elena's stomach clench with sudden, ravenous need. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten before Thomas came home, certainly. Maybe longer. Thank you, she murmured, climbing from the bed on unsteady legs. Her body ached in a dozen places, each bruise announcing itself as she moved. Lucian noticed, of course he noticed. Those strange, smoke-colored eyes tracked every wince, every careful movement. You should eat slowly, he said. Your body needs time to recover. Elena sat at the table and forced herself to take measured bites of bread and cheese, though everything in her wanted to devour it all at once. Lucian remained by the door, hands clasped behind his back, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. Aren't you going to eat? She asked. I've already dined. Something in his pause made her look up sharply. In the lamplight, his skin was even paler than she remembered, almost translucent. And his stillness, she realized now that he didn't breathe. His chest didn't rise and fall. He simply stood there, motionless as a statue, as if breathing were an optional activity he'd chosen to forgo. You're not human, Elena said. The words came out flat, factual, stripped of the fear they should have carried. Lucian went very still, stiller than before, if that were possible. No, he said quietly. I'm not. What are you? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he moved to the window and looked out at the darkened gardens, his profile sharp against the glass. What do you think I am? Elena set down her bread with trembling fingers. The stories people tell, about the disappearances, the bodies found in alleyways, drained of blood, the old families who never walk in daylight. She swallowed hard. Vampire. The word hung between them like smoke. Lucian turned to face her, and his expression was carefully neutral. Yes, Elena's heart should have been racing. She should have been screaming, running, doing anything but sitting calmly at a table eating cheese while a vampire stood 10 feet away. But somehow the fear wouldn't come, or perhaps it was there, buried beneath exhaustion and the strange sense that she'd already survived the worst thing that could happen to her. Are you going to kill me? She asked. No, the answer was immediate, absolute. Never. Why not? Lucian moved closer, but slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat with careful, deliberate movements. Because I heard you scream, he said softly, and I remembered what it was like to be helpless. To be at the mercy of someone stronger, crueler. I remembered what it felt like to want anyone to stop and help. Elena studied his face, searching for deception and finding only a grief so old it had worn grooves into his features. How long have you been this? 243 years. He said it as easily as someone might say they were 30. I was 26 when I was turned. The city was smaller then, wilder. My family ruled it not as mayors or magistrates, but as protectors. We kept the peace between the mortal world and the immortal one, and now the family is gone, scattered or destroyed. I'm the last of the Ashford line in the city. His jaw tightened. I should have left years ago, but I can't seem to let go of the places that remember me. Elena took a sip of water, using the moment to gather her thoughts. The bodies in the alleyways. Was that you? No, Lucian's eyes flashed with something dark and angry. That's House Corvin. They're young, reckless vampires who think the old laws don't apply to them. They feed without consent, kill without consequence, and hide behind their house's power. He leaned forward. The old ways required permission. Feeding was in exchange blood for protection, blood for healing, blood given freely or not at all. House Corvin has forgotten that, or they simply don't care. Why don't you stop them? I'm one vampire against an entire house, and he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I'm not what I once was. There are rules among our kind, territories, hierarchies, blood oaths. I broke mine when I abandoned my house decades ago. I have no standing in vampire society, no authority. Elena absorbed this, her mind racing. The world she'd known, the simple, brutal world of market days and dinner preparations, and her husband's fists had been torn away to reveal something far stranger and more complex beneath. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. "Really?" Lucian met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Because you reminded me of someone I failed to save, a long time ago." He looked down at his hands, those cold, impossibly strong hands. "And because I'm tired of hearing screams and doing nothing." "Who is she?" "The one you failed?" "My sister, Catherine." His voice went soft. "She married a mortal man who seemed kind. By the time I learned the truth, she'd hidden the bruises for months. I was away, attending to house business in London. When I returned," he stopped, jaw working. "I was too late." Elena felt something crack open in her chest, recognition, perhaps, or kinship. "I'm sorry. So am I." Lucian stood abruptly, as if the stillness had become unbearable. "You should rest more. Your body needs time to heal." "I've been resting all day." "Then perhaps you'd like to see the house?" He offered it tentatively, like an olive branch. "It's not much, but it's safe. And there's a library if you read." Elena looked at him, this ancient, dangerous creature who'd saved her life and given her silk and treated her bruises with gentle hands. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt curiosity unfurling in her chest like a flower reaching toward impossible light. "I'd like that," she said. Lucian's smile was slight but genuine, and it transformed his face entirely, made him look almost human, almost young, despite the weight of centuries in his eyes. "Then come," he said, extending his hand. "Let me show you what remains of the House of Ashford." Elena took his cold hand, and together they walked into the shadowed halls of a house that remembered when monsters and humans had lived in careful, complicated peace. Chapter 4. Threads of Silver. The library took Elena's breath away. It occupied the entire east wing of the manor, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes. A spiral staircase of wrought iron connected the levels, and tall windows now shuttered against the night must have once flooded the space with daylight. Now it was lit by oil lamps Lucian ignited as they entered, their warm glow making the spines gleam like jewels. "Catherine loved this room," Lucian said, trailing his fingers along a shelf. "She'd spend entire nights here, reading by candlelight. She said books were windows into lives she'd never live." Elena moved deeper into the space, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of knowledge surrounding her. Her own education had been minimal, enough reading to manage household accounts, enough writing to pen letters. But these books spoke of philosophy, history, languages she couldn't identify. "You can read any of them," Lucian offered. "Consider this house yours while you're here." "While I'm here," Elena repeated, turning to face him. "How long will that be?" Lucian's expression shuddered. "As long as you need. Or as long as it's safe." "Safe from Thomas? Or safe from something else?" He moved to one of the tall windows and touched the shutter, not opening it, but simply resting his palm against the wood. "House Corvin doesn't know you exist yet, but they're expanding their territory, growing bolder. They've challenged the old boundaries, claimed hunting grounds that aren't theirs." He glanced at her. "Eventually, they'll notice this house is occupied again. When they do, they'll come to investigate. And then what? Then I'll deal with them." His voice went cold, flat. "But I'd rather you were far from here when that happens." Elena sat in one of the leather chairs scattered throughout the library, her body sinking into cushions that smelled of dust and age. "Where would I go? I have no family, no friends who'd take me in. Thomas made sure of that, isolated me, turned people away, until I had nothing but him." Lucian crossed to her, kneeling so they were eye level. The gesture was courtly, old-fashioned, and it made her chest tighten with something she couldn't name. "I have resources," he said. "Money, connections in other cities. I could arrange passage to London or Paris, or anywhere you'd like. A new name, a new life, freedom. Paid for with vampire gold?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "Trading one cage for another? It wouldn't be a cage." His eyes searched hers. "It would be a gift. No strings, no obligations, just a chance at the life you should have had." For a moment, Elena was tempted. She imagined stepping off a train in some foreign city, anonymous and unbound, with enough money to rent a room and start fresh. No Thomas, no bruises, no fear. But then she looked at Lucian, at the loneliness carved into every line of his face, the way he held himself apart, even as he knelt before her, and she realized something that should have terrified her but instead felt like truth. She didn't want to leave. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "For now, at least. Until I understand what this world is, what you are." Something flickered in Lucian's expression, surprise, perhaps, or relief. He nodded once and rose, putting careful distance between them again. Then I'll teach you, he said, the rules we live by, the houses and their hierarchies, how to protect yourself if House Corvin ever discovers you. Why would they care about me? I'm nobody. You're mortal, and you're under my protection. That makes you a statement. Lucian's jaw tightened. In vampire society, everything is about power and position. By sheltering you, I'm asserting a claim to this territory. I'm saying that humans here are not prey to be hunted at. Will. But you said you have no authority. I don't, which is why this is dangerous. He moved to a shelf and pulled down a thick volume bound in dark leather. But it's also necessary. House Corvin needs to remember that some of us still honor the old ways. He set the book on a reading table and opened it to reveal pages covered in elegant script and detailed illustrations. Elena leaned closer and saw drawings of vampire houses, their crests, their territories, their bloodlines trace back centuries. This is the Codex Sanguinis, Lucian explained. The blood laws. Every vampire is bound by these rules from the moment they're turned. They govern how we feed, how we turn others, how we interact with mortal society. Elena studied the pages, her finger hovering over an illustration of a vampire feeding from a willing human. The image was strangely beautiful, intimate rather than violent. You said feeding requires consent, always. Blood taken by force is poison, bitter, painful to consume. It marks the vampire as a predator, and other houses can hunt them for breaking the law. Lucian turned the page, revealing a list of violations and their punishments. But more than that, forced feeding corrupts us, makes us monsters in truth, rather than simply in nature. How often do you need to feed? The question hung between them, personal and invasive. Lucian's expression went carefully neutral. Every few days in small amounts, or once a week, more substantially. It depends on activity level, injuries, other factors, and who do you feed from? No one lately. He said it simply, but Elena caught the weight beneath the words. I left my house, which means I left my willing donors. I've been managing, feeding from animals when necessary, though it's not sustaining. Vampire society sees isolation as weakness, and weakness attracts predators. Elena looked at him, truly looked, and saw what she'd missed before. The hollows beneath his eyes, the sharp edges of his cheekbones, the way his clothes hung slightly loose on his frame. He was starving himself, had been for months, maybe years. Why? She asked softly. Lucian closed the book with careful precision. Because consent matters. And I won't take from humans who don't understand what they're offering. Won't trick them or use vampire glamour to cloud their minds. The old ways were built on trust, on exchange. Without that, he trailed off, jaw tight. Without that, you're no better than House Corvin. Yes, Elena stood and moved to face him directly. His eyes widened slightly. She was close enough now that she could see the fine lines at their corners. The inhuman stillness of his chest, the way lamplight caught in his dark hair like threads of silver. Teach me the rest, she said. The houses, the territories, the rules. If I'm going to stay in this world, I need to understand it. Elena, you saved my life, Lucian. Let me at least understand the danger you've put yourself in by doing it. He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw the war behind his eyes, the desire to protect her warring with something else. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition that she'd already made her choice, and arguing would dishonor it. Very well, he said finally. But understand this. Knowledge has a price in vampire society. Once you know our secrets, once you're truly part of this world, there's no going back to ignorance. Are you certain? Elena thought of Thomas's hands around her throat, of years spent walking on eggshells in her own home, of a life measured in bruises and silence. Then she looked at Lucian, dangerous, starving, impossibly gentle, and felt something shift in her chest like a door opening onto a dark and terrifying landscape. I'm certain, she said, and so, in a library filled with centuries of accumulated knowledge, a vampire began teaching a mortal woman how to survive in the shadows between two worlds. Chapter 5. When shadows speak. They spent 3 nights in the library, and Elena learned more in those hours than she had in all her years of stunted education. Lucian was a patient teacher, explaining the intricate hierarchies of vampire society with the ease of someone who'd lived them. He told her about the great houses, ancient bloodlines that ruled territories across Europe like invisible kingdoms. House Ashford had once controlled this region, maintaining peace between mortals and immortals through careful diplomacy and ironclad law. But when most of the family was destroyed in what Lucian only referred to as the Purge, their power fractured. House Corvin had moved in like wolves scenting blood. They're a Russian house, Lucian explained on the third night, spreading a map across the reading table. Old, but not ancient. They gain power through aggression rather than diplomacy. Their philosophy is simple. Humans are cattle, and vampires are apex predators. No contracts, no consent, no consequences. Elena traced the territory markings on the map, watching how Corvin's borders had expanded over the decades, swallowing smaller houses and unclaimed lands. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? The ruling council, the Noctis Assembly, is fractured. Some houses agree with Corvin's methods. Others are too weak to challenge them. And the rest? Lucian's expression darkened. The rest are too concerned with their own power to care about humans dying in alleyways. But you care. He looked at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Yes, though caring has cost me everything: my house, my standing, my place in vampire society. Some would say I'm a fool. I think you're brave, Elena said quietly. Lucian's hand stilled on the map. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he cleared his throat and returned to the lesson. But Elena saw the faint color that rose in his pale cheeks, proof that whatever he wasn't entirely dead. On the fourth night, Elena woke to voices. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, straining to hear through the thick walls of the manor. Male voices, multiple, coming from somewhere below. And Lucian's voice, low and dangerous, speaking words she couldn't make out. Elena slipped from bed and pulled on the dressing gown, then moved barefoot to her door. The hallway beyond was dark except for a sliver of lamplight coming from the entrance hall below. She crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. 3 vampires stood in the foyer with Lucian. She knew immediately what they were. They had that same supernatural stillness, that same predatory grace. But where Lucian carried himself with restrained elegance, these creatures radiated violence. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in modern clothing. That seemed wrong on them somehow, as if they were children playing dress-up in stolen clothes. The house is surprised to find you here, Ashford, the woman said. She had sharp features and hair like spilled ink, and her smile showed to many teeth. We thought you'd slunk away to some European backwater to nurse your wounded pride. My movements are my own concern. Katya, Lucian's voice was blade cold, as is my property, which you're currently trespassing upon. One of the men laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Property? You abandoned your claim decades ago. This territory belongs to House Corvin now. You have no rights here. The Codex Sanguinis says otherwise. Blood ties to land persist for 3 centuries after abandonment. My family has held this estate for 400 years. I have 157 years of claim remaining. Katya circled him like a shark. The Codex is outdated. Lord Corvin has petitioned the Assembly to revise those laws. Soon, your precious blood ties will mean nothing. Until then, they mean everything. Lucian's hands remained loose at his sides, but Elena saw the coiled tension in his frame. Leave, now, before this becomes a formal challenge. A challenge? The second man stepped forward, and Elena's stomach turned. His eyes were wrong to bright, too eager, like a child about to torture an insect. You're weakened, Ashford. We can smell it. When did you last feed properly? Months ago? Years? He inhaled deeply, theatrically. And what's that other scent? Fresh bruises, human fear, soft skin. His gaze drifted toward the staircase. You're harboring a mortal. Elena's blood turned to ice. Lucian moved between them and the stairs with inhuman speed, his body a wall of barely restrained violence. She is under my protection. Touch her, and I invoke the right of sanctuary. Every house in the Assembly will hunt you. Sanctuary? Katya's laugh was cruel. For a random human? You've grown sentimental in your isolation. I've grown tired of vampires who think mortality makes someone worthless. Lucian's voice dropped to something lethal. Test me, Katya. See what this weakened, isolated vampire can still do when properly motivated. The 3 Corvin vampires exchanged glances. Elena held her breath, pressed against the wall at the top of the stairs, watching the standoff with her heart in her throat. She should run, hide, do something, but her legs wouldn't move. Finally, Katya stepped back with a dismissive wave. Keep your pet, Ashford, for now. But Lord Corvin will hear about this. And when he comes, her smile was all fangs. Even sanctuary won't save her. They left in a blur of movement, the front door slamming behind them hard enough to rattle the portraits on the walls. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Lucian stood motionless for a long moment, his shoulders rigid. Then he turned and looked directly up at where Elena hid in the shadows. You can come down, he said quietly. They're gone. Elena descended on trembling legs. When she reached the foyer, Lucian was staring at the door, his expression carved from stone. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to, they would have sended you regardless. He turned to her, and she saw fury warring with fear in his eyes. I knew this would happen eventually, but I'd hoped for more time. Time for what? To prepare. To strengthen myself. He stopped, jaw working. To make sure you could survive what's coming. Elena moved closer, until she stood directly in front of him. What is coming? Lucian's gaze dropped to her throat, then quickly away, but not before she saw the hunger flash through his eyes, raw and desperate. War, he said simply. House Corvin won't tolerate my defiance. They'll return with more vampires, stronger ones. They'll try to take this house, break my claim, and, he swallowed hard, they'll try to take you, to prove I have no power left. Then we prepare, Elena said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. You said you'd teach me to protect myself. So teach me. Elena, you don't understand. I understand that you're starving yourself. That you're weakened because you refuse to feed. That you put yourself between me and 3 predators despite barely being able to stand. She reached out and took his cold hand in both of hers. I understand that you're fighting a war you think you've already lost. Lucian stared at their joined hands as if they were a puzzle he couldn't solve. What are you saying? Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced the words out. I'm saying you don't have to starve. I'm saying that consent matters, and I'm giving it. Feed from me, Lucian. Get strong enough to protect us both. The silence that followed was absolute. Lucian's eyes widened, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely shocked. You don't know what you're offering. Then explain it to me. He pulled his hand free and stepped back, creating distance. Blood exchange creates a bond. Not always, but often enough that it's dangerous. You'd feel what I feel, know where I am, be drawn to me in ways you can't control. It's intimate, Elena, more intimate than. He stopped, shaking his head. I won't bind you to me. Not like that. What if I want to be bound? The question hung between them like a held breath. Lucian stared at her, and Elena saw centuries of loneliness crack open behind his eyes, saw the desperate, impossible hope he was trying to suppress. Why? He whispered. Because I'm tired of being powerless, Elena said. Because you're fighting to protect me, and I want to fight beside you. Because, she swallowed hard. Because you make me feel alive for the first time in years. Lucian closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they burned like smoke-filled silver. If we do this, he said slowly, it will change everything. Good, Elena said. I want everything changed. Chapter 6. Blood and Silver. Lucian led her back to the library, moving as if in a trance. His hands trembled, the first sign of uncertainty Elena had seen from him. He lit every lamp in the room until it blazed with warm light, then turned to face her with an expression caught between hunger and reverence. If we do this, he said, his voice rough, we do it properly. With ritual, with respect. The old ways. He gestured to one of the leather chairs. Sit, please. Elena sat, her heart racing so hard she was certain he could hear it. Probably could. Vampires had heightened senses, he'd explained during their lessons. He could likely smell her fear, her anticipation, the confusing tangle of emotions coursing through her. Lucian knelt before her again, that same courtly gesture that made something in her chest tighten. He took her hand gently, cradling it as if it were made of glass. The Codex Sanguinis requires verbal consent, he said, meeting her eyes. Clear, unambiguous, freely given. So I ask you, Elena, do you consent to share your blood with me? Do you understand that this may create a bond between us? That you may feel my emotions and I may feel yours? That you're choosing to tie yourself to a creature that vampire society considers outcast and powerless? Elena looked at him, really looked. At the sharp beauty of his features, the desperate hunger barely leashed behind his careful control, the loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. She thought of Thomas's hands, which had only ever hurt her, and then of Lucian's hands, which had been nothing but gentle, despite their terrible strength. I consent, she said clearly, freely and without coercion. I choose this, Lucian. I choose you. Something in his expression shattered and reformed. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, old-fashioned, reverent. Thank you, he whispered, for trusting me with this. Then he turned her hand over and studied her wrist, his thumb tracing the delicate veins beneath her skin. Elena shivered at the touch, at the dark promise in his eyes. It will hurt, he warned. Only for a moment. Then, his voice dropped to something almost hypnotic. Then you'll feel everything I feel. The connection between us will open like a door. If it becomes too much, if you want me to stop, just say so. I'll stop immediately. Do you understand? Yes. Lucian's fangs descended with a soft click, elegant, razor sharp, nothing like the grotesque tusks from folklore. He bent his head over her wrist, and Elena felt his cool breath against her skin, raising goosebumps along her arm. Thank you, he said again, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Then he bit. Pain lanced through her wrist, bright and sharp, like pressing a hot needle to skin. Elena gasped, her free hand gripping the arm of the chair. But before she could cry out, the pain transformed into something else entirely. Warmth flooded through her veins, starting at the bite and radiating outward. Not physical warmth, something deeper, stranger. It felt like coming home after a long journey, like being seen for the first time. Like every lonely night she'd ever endured, suddenly acknowledged and understood. And beneath that, she felt him, Lucian's hunger. Yes, vast and terrible and held in check by sheer force of will for months, maybe years. But also his loneliness, so profound it made her chest ache. His fear for her safety, his wonder that she'd offered this freely, without expectation of payment or promise. His guilt for taking even this small amount, and beneath it all, a growing tenderness that terrified him more than any vampire army. Oh, Elena thought, he cares. He actually cares. Lucian's emotions washed over her like waves, and she understood with sudden clarity that this was what terrified him, not the feeding, but the vulnerability. The bond laid them both bare, stripped away every defense, every carefully maintained wall. She felt. The moment he took his first pull of blood, felt his body respond with desperate relief. Cells that had been slowly dying, suddenly flooding with life. His grip on her wrist tightened, and his other hand came up to cradle her arm with shocking gentleness, as if she might shatter. Easy, she thought, not knowing if he could hear her through the bond. I'm stronger than I look. His answer came back, not in words, but in feeling, gratitude, wonder, and a fierce protectiveness that made her breath catch. Time became strange. Elena couldn't tell if he fed for seconds or minutes. She was lost in the sensation, in the intimacy of it. In the knowledge that she was giving him strength and he was accepting it like a gift rather than taking it like a thief. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were no longer dull gray, but brilliant silver, almost luminous. Color had returned to his skin, and the hollow shadows beneath his eyes had filled out. He looked vital, powerful, but he was staring at her wrist with something like horror. Forgive me, he said, his voice wrecked. I took too much. I felt you, and I couldn't. Lucian. Elena cupped his face with her free hand, forcing him to look at her. How much did you take? More than I should have. Elena, you'll be weak. How much? He swallowed hard. Maybe a pint. Not enough to truly harm you, but enough that you'll need rest, food, time to recover. Elena looked at her wrist. 2 small puncture wounds welled with blood, but they were already beginning to close, some property of vampire saliva. Lucian had mentioned during their lessons. That helps seal the wound and prevent infection. I feel fine, she said, and it was true. A little lightheaded, perhaps, but also strangely energized, as if she'd drunk strong wine. Better than fine, actually. The bond, Lucian said quietly. You're feeling what I feel. The strength returning, the hunger finally satisfied. It will fade slightly once we're apart, but, he touched the bite marks gently, almost reverently. You'll always feel me now, Elena. Always know where I am, what I'm feeling, and I'll feel you. Good, Elena said. She could still sense him through the bond, his wonder, his fear, his carefully suppressed joy. Then you'll know I'm telling the truth when I say I don't regret this. Lucian closed his eyes, and she felt his emotions spike, a complicated tangle of relief and terror and something dangerously close to affection. When he opened them again, they blazed with renewed purpose. Then we prepare, he said, rising to his feet with fluid grace. The weakness that had plagued him was gone, replaced by predatory power. House Corvin will return, probably within days. We need to fortify this house, establish defenses, and most importantly, he pulled her gently to her feet. I need to teach you how to kill a vampire. Elena's eyebrows rose. You can be killed? With difficulty, yes. And you're going to learn how. His smile was sharp, dangerous, and absolutely devastating. Because when they come for us, I won't be the only one fighting back. Elena felt the bond hum between them, his determination flowing into her, her courage flowing into him, 2 damaged souls suddenly reinforcing. each other like interlocking stones in an arch. Teach me, she said, and as dawn approached and Lucian showed her to a basement armory, filled with weapons designed to kill immortals, Elena realized she was no longer running from danger. She was preparing to face it head-on. Chapter 7. The Sigurði had 5 days, 5 days of preparation before House Corvin returned, and when they came with numbers. Elena stood at an upper window, on the 5th night, watching fog roll through the estate grounds. Through the bond, she felt Lucian moving through the house below, making final preparations. His emotions were carefully controlled now, locked down to avoid overwhelming her. But she caught flashes, grim determination, protective fury, and beneath it all, a tender fear focused entirely on her safety. The armory had yielded weapons Elena never imagined existed. Silver blades that burned vampire flesh on contact. Wooden stakes carved from ash and blessed with rituals older than the city. Vials of holy water that Lucian handled with careful respect. Explaining that faith mattered more than the object itself. True belief could make even tap water deadly to vampires who'd forgotten their humanity. The key, Lucian had told her during their training, is that we're harder to kill than humans, but not impossible. Decapitation works. Fire works. A stake through the heart will paralyze us long enough for someone to finish the job. He'd placed a silver dagger in her hand, teaching her the proper grip. Aim for major artery's throat, femoral wrist. We heal quickly, but blood loss still weakens us. And silver prevents rapid healing. Now Elena wore that dagger strapped to her thigh beneath her borrowed dress. Its weight both comforting and terrifying. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's attention snap toward the front gate. They're here. His voice whispered through the connection, not audible words, but meaning transmitted directly into her mind. 8 of them, maybe more. Stay in the upper hall, where we planned. Elena left the window and moved to the hallway overlooking the entrance hall, taking position behind a marble column. From here, she could see the front door and the grand staircase, but would remain hidden unless she chose to reveal herself. The door exploded inward, not opened, exploded, torn from its hinges by supernatural strength, and sent skidding across the marble floor. 6 vampires poured through the opening like a tide of predators, Katya in the lead, with her cruel smile and 2 bright eyes. Lucian stood at the base of the staircase, perfectly still, perfectly controlled. He'd dressed formally for this dark suit, silk cravat, every inch the aristocratic lord he'd once been. But Elena could feel the violence coiled beneath his civilized exterior, ready to explode. Lord Corvin sends his regards, Katya purred, circling into the entrance hall. Her companions fanned out around her, young vampires, probably less than a century old, with the recklessness of those who'd never known consequences. He's disappointed you didn't accept his invitation to submit peacefully. I don't submit to bullies and murderers, Lucian said coldly. Tell your lord that House Ashford still stands, and this territory remains under my protection. One of the younger vampires laughed. You and what army, old man? You're alone, weakened, clinging to laws nobody respects anymore. Am I? Lucian's smile was razor sharp. You sent a mortal here last time. Do you smell her now? The vampires went still, nostrils flaring. Elena held her breath, pressing deeper into the shadows. Lucian had taught her to mask her scent using a mixture of herbs and ash, not perfect, but enough to confuse young vampires. She's gone, Katya said, though uncertainty flickered across her face. You sent her away. Smart choice. Or perhaps, Lucian said softly, she's simply better hidden than you are at seeking. It was the signal they'd planned. Elena stepped out from behind the column and threw the first vial of holy water. It shattered against the nearest vampire's face, and his scream was inhuman, high and keening as his skin blistered and smoked. He fell, clawing at his burning eyes. Chaos erupted. Lucian moved like liquid death, silver blade flashing as he met the first vampire's charge. They collided with a sound like thunder, and Elena saw why he'd told her to stay back. Vampire combat was impossibly fast, impossibly violent. Bodies blurred and crashed together, and when they separated, blood painted the marble floor. 2 vampires broke away from the melee, heading for the staircase, heading for her. Elena's heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady. She drew the silver dagger and braced herself, remembering everything Lucian had taught her. They're faster, stronger, but they're also cocky. Use their confidence against them. The first vampire reached her with inhuman speed, fangs bared, and Elena dropped into a crouch, slashing upward with the silver blade. It caught him across the thigh, severing the femoral artery. He screamed and stumbled, and Elena drove the dagger into his chest, not deep enough for the heart, but enough to buy precious seconds as silver burned through tissue. The second vampire grabbed her from behind before she could react, arms like iron bands around her ribs. His breath was cold against her neck, and she felt his fangs graze her skin. Then Lucian was there. He tore the vampire away with terrifying strength and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack stone. The creature's head tilted at an unnatural angle, and he crumpled. Behind you. Elena screamed. Lucian spun, catching Katya's blade on his forearm. Blood sprayed his blood, dark and almost black in the lamplight. Through the bond, Elena felt his pain spike, felt him pushing it down to stay focused. He grappled with Katya, both moving too fast for Elena's eyes to track clearly. The vampire Elena had wounded staggered to his feet, murder in his eyes. She grabbed the wooden stake from her belt, ashwood, blessed, sharp as sin, and waited for him to charge. He lunged, Elena sidestepped and brought the stake down with all her strength, driving it between his shoulder blades. Not the heart, not quite, but close enough. He seized, paralyzed, and collapsed. Elena. Lucian's voice, ragged with effort. She turned to see him struggling with 3 vampires at once, blood streaming from wounds on his face and chest. His strength had returned with her blood, but he was outnumbered, and even vampire healing had limits. Elena didn't think. She grabbed another vial of holy water and ran down the stairs, skidding across blood-slick marble to reach the fight. She smashed the vial against the nearest vampire's back, and his screams gave Lucian the opening he needed. His blade flashed once, twice. 2 bodies fell, their heads rolling across the floor with sickening wet sounds. Katya stood alone now, breathing hard, her earlier confidence shattered. She looked at the carnage around her, 4 dead, 2 wounded, all within minutes. Her eyes found Elena, and naked hatred twisted her features. You'll die for this, mortal, she hissed. Both of you. Lord Corvin will bring the entire house down on your heads. Let him try, Lucian said, stepping between them. Blood dripped from his wounds, but he stood straight, unbowed. And tell him that House Ashford remembers how to fight. Tell him we will not yield. Katya bared her fangs, then vanished in a blur of movement, fleeing through the shattered doorway into the night. The wounded vampires limped after her, leaving their dead behind. Silence fell like a curtain. Lucian swayed, and Elena caught him as his legs buckled. Through the bond, she felt his strength failing, not from the fight, but from the blood loss, the wounds that even vampire healing couldn't close quickly enough. I've got you, she whispered, guiding him to sit on the stairs. You did it. We did it. They'll be back, Lucian said, his voice weak. Stronger next time. Lord Corvin himself, perhaps. Then we'll face that when it comes. Elena pressed her hands against his worst, wound a deep gash across his ribs, trying to slow the bleeding. Right now, you need to heal. Lucian's eyes met hers, and she saw exhaustion, pain, and something else, pride perhaps, or wonder. You were magnificent, he said softly. Terrifying and magnificent. Elena laughed shakily, adrenaline still singing through her veins. I was terrified. So was I. His hand found hers, sticky with his blood. But we survived. Together. Through the bond, she felt his emotions surge, relief, gratitude, and beneath it all, something fierce and tender that made her breath catch. Not love, not yet, but the seed of it taking root in soil that had been barren for centuries. Come on, Elena said, pulling him to his feet. Let's get you cleaned up. And then, she looked at the bodies, at the blood, at the shattered door, letting cold night air into the house. Then we figure out what comes next. Lucian leaned on her as they climbed the stairs. And Elena marveled at the strangeness of it, supporting a creature that could tear her apart without effort. Who trusted her enough to show this weakness? The war had begun, but for the first time in years, Elena didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a survivor. Chapter 8. Aftermath. Elena had never seen so much blood. It took 3 hours to clean the entrance hall, scrubbing vampire blood from marble, hauling bodies to the estate's overgrown gardens, where Lucian buried them with grim efficiency. Her hands shook the entire time, adrenaline fading into exhaustion and delayed shock. Lucian moved through it all with mechanical precision, though Elena felt his pain through the bond, sharp spikes every time he lifted something heavy, dull throbs from wounds that hadn't fully closed. He'd refused to let her help with the bodies, insisting she'd done enough, seen enough, but she'd stayed anyway, unable to leave him alone with the carnage. Dawn was approaching when they finally finished. Lucian sealed the shattered doorway with boards and nails, temporary repairs that wouldn't hold against another assault, but would at least keep out the morning light. Then he turned to Elena, taking in her blood-stained dress, her hollow eyes. The way she held herself too carefully, as if afraid she might break. You should rest, he said softly. So should you. Elena's voice came out hoarse. Your wounds will heal. Slowly, but they will. He crossed to her, moving stiffly now that the battle rage had faded. Elena, what you did tonight, you saved my life, multiple times. I don't know how to don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. Don't thank me for fighting beside you. We're in this together, remember? That's what the bond means. Something flickered in his expression, gratitude mixed with guilt. Through their connection, she felt his emotions churning, relief that they'd survived, horror at what she'd been forced to do, fear of what was coming, and beneath it all, a growing attachment that terrified him. I've made you a killer, he said quietly. You drove a stake through a man's back tonight. That changes a person, Elena, scars them in ways that don't show on the skin. Elena looked down at her hand, still trembling slightly, still stained with blood despite her scrubbing. He was right. She'd killed tonight. Not Thomas, not the man who'd beaten her, but vampires who would have torn her apart without hesitation. Self-defense, survival, justified, but still, she'd taken lives. She waited for the guilt, the horror, the breakdown she was supposed to have. It didn't come. Instead, she felt nothing. No, not nothing. She felt free. For the first time in years, she'd fought back. She'd been powerful instead of powerless. She'd protected instead of being protected. And if that made her a killer, then perhaps she'd been training for it all along. In Thomas's house, where survival had meant swallowing screams and learning to disappear. I'm not sorry, she said, meeting Lucian's eyes. I'm not. Does that make me a monster? No, his answer was immediate, absolute. It makes you a survivor. But Elena, he reached out, then stopped himself, hand hovering in the air between them. I need you to understand what you've committed to. House Corvin won't stop. They'll send more vampires, stronger ones, until either we're dead or they are. This estate is now a war zone, and you're standing in the center of it. I know, you could still leave. I could arrange passage tonight before dawn. Money, documents, safe passage to I'm not leaving. Elena closed the distance between them and took his hand, the one he'd been holding so carefully, away from her. His fingers were cold, sticky with drying blood, and she didn't care. Stop trying to protect me from my own choices, Lucian. I chose to stay. I chose to fight. I choose this. Why? The word broke from him like a confession. Why would you choose this nightmare when you could have freedom? Elena looked at him, really looked. At the centuries of loneliness written in the lines around his eyes. At the wounds he'd taken defending her. At the careful distance he maintained even now. As if he didn't deserve her touch. Because I was dying in that house with Thomas, she said quietly. Slowly, bit by bit, until there would have been nothing left but a ghost. And then you heard me scream, and you stopped. You saved me, Lucian. Not just from Thomas, but from the life that was killing me. She squeezed his hand. This might be a nightmare, but at least I'm alive in it. I feel things, terror, yes, but also courage, purpose, connection. I'd rather die fighting beside you than live another day as the woman I was. Lucian stared at her, and through the bond, Elena felt his carefully constructed walls crack and crumble, felt the desperate loneliness beneath, the hope he'd tried to bury, the affection he'd been fighting since the moment she'd offered her blood. You're extraordinary, he whispered, and I'm terrified of what that means. Why? Because he stopped, jaw working. Then the words came in a rush, as if confessing a sin. Because I'm starting to care about you in ways I shouldn't. Because you're mortal and I'm not. And that means watching you age and die while I remain unchanged. Because caring about someone gives your enemies a weapon to use against you. Because Elena kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. She simply closed the remaining distance between them and pressed her lips to his, tasting blood and smoke and something indefinably him. For a heartbeat, Lucian went rigid with shock. Then he responded. His arms came around her carefully, as if she might shatter, and he kissed her back with a desperate tenderness that made her chest ache. His lips were cold, but not unpleasant, and when his hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his touch was reverent. Through the bond, his emotions flooded her, wonder, joy, terror, desire, and a fierce protectiveness that threatened to overwhelm them both. She felt his restraint, the hunger still there beneath the surface, the predator carefully leashed so it wouldn't harm her. Felt him fighting every instinct to pull her closer, take more, claim her completely. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard though only she technically needed to breathe. Lucian rested his forehead against hers. "This is dangerous," he said, but he didn't let go. "Elena, I'm dangerous. The bond is already strong, but this intimacy, affection, whatever this is becoming, it will make it stronger. You'll be tied to me in ways you can't undo. If I die, you'll feel it. If I'm tortured, you'll feel it. If House Corvin captures me and uses me against you, then we don't get captured." Elena pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Lucian, I know the risks, but I also know that I haven't felt this alive in years, maybe ever. So stop trying to protect me from feeling something good for once in my miserable life." A laugh broke from him, rough and surprised and painfully genuine. "You're infuriating." "Good." Elena smiled, and felt his heart, or whatever vampires had, instead respond through the bond. "Someone needs to infuriate you. You're far too controlled otherwise. Control is what's keeping you alive, and recklessness is what's keeping you alive." She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "We balance each other. That's what the bond is showing us." Lucian caught her hand and pressed it to his lips, that same old-fashioned gesture that made her stomach flip. "If we do this," he said quietly, "if we let this be what it's becoming, then there's no going back. You understand that? You'll be bound to a vampire outcast, hunted by houses that want me dead, living in shadows and danger for however long we survive." "I understand," Elena said. "And I choose it anyway. I choose you." The words hung between them like a vow. Outside, the sky was lightening, dawn approaching fast. Lucian glanced toward the boarded windows with something like resignation. "I need to retreat to the cellar before the sun rises," he said. Will you? Will you be all right alone during the day?" Elena thought about being alone in this vast house filled with blood and memories, about having hours to process everything that had happened. Part of her wanted to ask him to stay, but she knew he couldn't. Sunlight was one of the few things that could truly kill a vampire. "I'll be fine," she said. "I'll rest, eat, clean myself up. And tonight, when you wake, we'll plan our next move." Lucian nodded, but he didn't move. Instead, he pulled her close again, holding her as if memorizing the feeling of her in his arms. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for choosing to stand with me, for not running when you had every reason to, for being brave enough to kiss a monster." "You're not a monster," Elena said fiercely. "You're the best man I've ever known, human or otherwise." Through the bond, she felt his emotions surge to complex to name, but warm and bright and achingly tender. Then he released her and disappeared into the shadows, heading for whatever sanctuary he'd prepared in the cellar. Elena stood alone in the entrance hall, surrounded by the evidence of battle, and felt the bond stretch between them like a golden thread, connected, chosen, no longer alone. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, Elena believed they might actually survive it. Chapter 9. Lessons in Darkness. Elena spent the day in restless motion, unable to settle despite her exhaustion. She bathed first, scrubbing away blood and grime until the water in the copper tub ran dark. Then she raided Catherine's old wardrobe for clean clothes, choosing a simple dress of deep burgundy that fit reasonably well with some adjustments. The practical tasks helped quiet her racing mind, but they couldn't silence the questions circling like carrion birds. What would House Corvin send next? When would they come? And most pressingly, could she and Lucian truly survive against an entire vampire house? Through the bond, she felt him sleeping a strange, deep stillness unlike human sleep. No dreams flickered through the connection, just a profound quietness that somehow comforted her. He was safe, at least for now, hidden from the lethal daylight. Late afternoon, Elena returned to the library and pulled down the Codex Sanguinis. If they were going to fight a war, she needed to understand every rule, every loophole, every weapon available to them. She read about blood oaths binding contracts that couldn't be broken without severe consequences, about the Noctis Assembly and its complex hierarchy of houses, about the right of sanctuary Lucian had invoked, which protected mortals under a vampire's care, but also made them symbols of that vampire's power or weakness. One passage made her stop cold. When a vampire bonds with a mortal through repeated blood exchange, the mortal becomes anima vinculum, a soul-bound companion. Such bonds grant the mortal extended life and limited access to vampire abilities, but also mark them as irrevocably belonging to their bonded vampire. To kill or claim an anima vinculum is considered an act of war against the vampire who holds the bond. Elena's fingers traced the words. Extended life, limited abilities, belonging. Was that what she was becoming? What Lucian was afraid of creating? She felt him wake through the bond as the sun set, a sudden surge of awareness, like a candle being lit in darkness. His emotions flooded the connection, concern for her, residual pain from his wounds, and a warm tenderness when he sensed she was well. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, and then Lucian appeared in the library doorway. He'd cleaned himself up as well, dressed in fresh clothes, his hair still damp. The worst of his wounds had closed, though she could see faint scars that would take another night to fully heal. "You've been reading," he observed, noting the codex open before her. "Learning," Elena corrected. "Tell me about Anima Vinculum." Lucian went very still. "Where did you?" He saw the page and closed his eyes briefly. "Of course. Is that what I'm becoming?" "Possibly." He crossed to stand across the table from her, keeping that careful distance. "It depends on how often we exchange blood, how deep the bond grows. One feeding won't do it, but repeated exchanges." He trailed off. "It wasn't my intention, Elena. I swear it. I only fed once. I'm not accusing you of anything." Elena stood to face him properly. "I'm asking because I want to understand. The Codex says it grants extended life and abilities." "What abilities?" Lucian hesitated, then seemed to decide honesty was better than evasion. "Enhanced strength, though nowhere near vampire levels. Faster healing, heightened senses. Some bonds even grant limited telepathy or the ability to sense other vampires." His jaw tightened. "But it also means you're marked. Other vampires will smell my blood in your veins, know you're claimed. You become a target, a trophy, a way to hurt me." "I'm already a target," Elena pointed out. "Katya made that clear. At least this way, I'd be a target with weapons to fight back. It would also bind you to me more completely. The bond would be nearly impossible to break without killing one of us." He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "Elena, if we continue exchanging blood, you won't just be choosing to stand with me, you'll be choosing to become part of me. Your life expectancy would increase to potentially centuries, but you'd no longer be entirely human. You'd exist in the space between not mortal, not vampire, but something other." Elena absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. "And if we don't exchange blood again? If we keep the bond as it is, it would fade over time. Weeks, maybe months. You'd return to being fully human, and he looked away. "I'd lose the connection to you, the ability to feel your emotions, sense your well-being. We'd be separate again." The thought made something in Elena's chest constrict painfully. The bond had become familiar already, a comfort she hadn't realized she'd grown dependent on. Knowing Lucian was there, feeling his presence like a warm anchor in her mind, losing that felt like losing a limb. "I don't want to lose it," she said quietly. "The connection, even if it means becoming something other." Lucian's head snapped up, eyes wide. "You can't mean that." "Why not?" Elena moved around the table toward him. "What am I giving up, really? A chance to grow old and die alone? A return to human society that never protected me when I needed it? Thomas is gone. My family is dead or distant. I have no friends, no prospects, nothing waiting for me in the mortal world." She stopped in front of him. "But here, with you, I have purpose. I have someone who sees me, values me, fights beside me. Why would I give that up to chase some fantasy of normalcy that never existed for me anyway?" "Because you deserve a choice," Lucian said roughly. "A real choice, not one made in the aftermath of trauma and violence. You're still healing, Elena, from Thomas, from your old life. You might feel differently in a month, a year, and I might not." She took his hands, ignoring how he tensed. "Lucian, I know what you're afraid of. You're afraid I'm choosing you out of gratitude or fear, or because I have nowhere else to go. You're afraid I'll wake up one day and regret this. But I need you to trust that I know my own mind. You're 23 years old and I've lived more in these past weeks than I did in the previous 3 years combined." Elena's voice sharpened. "Stop treating me like I'm too young or too damaged to know what I want. Yes, I'm wounded. Yes, I'm changed by what's happened. But that doesn't make my choices less valid." Lucian stared at her, and through the bond, she felt his internal war, the desire to accept what she offered warring with his guilt and fear and the weight of centuries teaching him that mortals were fragile, temporary to precious to risk. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it properly, not in desperation or necessity, but because we both choose it freely. And that means waiting at least until this war with House Corvin is resolved. Until you're not making decisions while your life is in immediate danger." Elena wanted to argue, but she saw the wisdom in it. "How long? Until we've won or lost. Until you've seen what vampire politics truly look like, what my world demands." Until you've had time away from constant crisis to think clearly. He squeezed her hands gently. If you still want this bond after all that, after seeing the worst of what it means to stand with me, then I'll give it to you. Freely and fully. It wasn't what Elena wanted. She wanted the bond deepened now, wanted the strength and security it promised. But she understood his caution, even admired it. He was protecting her from her own impulses, giving her space to be certain. Fine, she said. We wait. But Lucian, she met his eyes. I won't change my mind. You need to accept that possibility. I'm trying, he admitted. It goes against everything I've learned into centuries. But he touched her face with careful reverence. You're teaching me that some rules deserve to be broken. A knock sounded at the front door sharp. Deliberate, unmistakably deliberate. They both froze, through the bond. Elena felt Lucian's alarm spike. No one knocked in vampire society. They either entered by invitation or broke down the door. A knock meant someone was following protocols, observing formalities. Someone important. Stay behind me, Lucian said, already moving toward the entrance hall. And keep your weapons close. Elena grabbed the silver dagger and followed, her heart in her throat. When Lucian opened the repaired door, a man stood on the threshold, tall, elegant, with silver-threaded black hair and eyes like frozen amber. He wore clothes that screamed wealth and power. And behind him stood a woman with a face like carved ice, and 4 other vampires radiating barely leash violence. Lucian Ashford, the man said, his voice cultured and cold. How delightful to find you still drawing breath. Or whatever it is we do. Through the bond, Elena felt Lucian's recognition and dread. Lord Corvin himself had come. Chapter 10. The choice. Lord Corvin stepped across the threshold without invitation, and Elena felt Lucian's fury spike through the bond. Breaking the threshold laws, entering a vampire's home uninvited was one of the gravest insults in their society. You dare, Lucian began. But Corvin raised one elegant hand. Your threshold was already broken when my children shattered your door. His smile was sharp as a blade. I'm merely walking through ruins, Ashford. No law broken that wasn't already destroyed. The 4 vampires filed in behind him, fanning out with military precision. The woman who moved with the same predatory grace as Corvin studied Elena with open curiosity that made her skin crawl. So this is the mortal who killed 3 of my fledglings, Corvin said, his gaze sliding to Elena. How unexpected. Tell me, little human, did Ashford promise you immortality for your service? Or are you simply too foolish to understand the danger you've placed yourself in? Neither, Elena said, before Lucian could stop her. I fight because I choose to. Because your house murders innocence and calls it hunting. Corvin's eyebrows rose. She has spirit. I can see why you've grown attached, Ashford. Though attachment to mortals always ends so messily. He moved deeper into the entrance hall, examining the repaired damage with a critical eye. You fought well. I'll grant you that. My children underestimated you both. But surely you understand this is over? You can't win against an entire house. Then why are you here? Lucian's voice was ice. If you're so confident in your victory, why negotiate? Because the Noctis Assembly is watching. Corvin turned to face them fully. You invoked sanctuary. You made this about the old laws, the old ways. And now certain traditionalist houses are asking uncomfortable questions about my methods. His expression darkened. You've become an inconvenience, Ashford. A symbol of resistance that others might rally behind. Good, Lucian said flatly. Corvin's laugh was genuine, almost admiring. I'd forgotten how stubborn your line could be. Very well. I'm here to offer terms, a way for us both to walk away with our pride intact. I'm listening. Swear fealty to House Corvin. Acknowledge my claim to this territory and submit to my authority. In exchange, I'll grant you a position within my house, minor, but respectable. You'll have protection, resources, and the freedom to continue your antiquated approach to feeding, so long as you don't interfere with my operations. Corvin's gaze slid to Elena. You may even keep your pet, if you're so attached. I'll grant her sanctuary under House Corvin's protection. Elena felt Lucian's revulsion through the bond, not at the offer of safety, but at the cost. Swearing fealty would mean abandoning every principle he stood for, bowing to a house that treated humans as cattle, becoming complicit in the very murders he opposed. And if I refuse? Lucian asked quietly. Then I return with 30 vampires and raze this estate to the ground. You'll die, your mortal will die, and House Ashford will be nothing but a footnote in history. Corvin's smile never wavered. Choose wisely. You have until midnight tomorrow. He turned to leave, his entourage following, but the ice-faced woman paused beside Elena. You reek of his blood, she murmured. her voice pitched too low for the others to hear. The bond has already begun. If he dies, you'll feel every moment of it, the pain, the fear, the final darkness. Remember that when you counsel him toward defiance. Then she was gone, and the house fell silent except for the sound of the door closing. Elena's legs gave out. She sat heavily on the stairs, her mind reeling. Lucian remained standing, staring at the door, his emotions a churning storm through the bond: rage, fear, despair, and beneath it all, a crushing sense of defeat. You're considering it, Elena said. Not a question. I'm considering your life. Lucian turned to face her, and she saw the weight of centuries in his expression. Elena, he's right. I can't win against 30 vampires. Even with your help, even fighting with everything we have, we'll lose. And when we lose, you'll die, horribly. They'll make it slow to punish me for my defiance. So you'll bow to a monster instead? I'll keep you alive, Lucian said fiercely. That's all that matters now. Your life, your safety. Everything else is secondary. Elena stood, moving down the stairs until she was level with him. And what kind of life would that be? Living under House Corvin's protection, watching them kill innocents, knowing we could have fought, but chose survival instead? She shook her head. That's not living, Lucian. That's just dying slowly while still breathing. Better slow death than quick one, is it? Elena grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to what you're saying. You're ready to throw away everything you believe in, everything Catherine died for, everything House Ashford stood for, just to keep me alive for a few more years. Her voice cracked. Don't put that on me. Don't make my life the excuse for your surrender. Through the bond, she felt his anguish, the terrible choice tearing him apart. Save her and lose his soul, or keep his honor and watch her die. There has to be another way, he said desperately. Some option we haven't considered. There is. Elena's voice steadied with sudden certainty. The bond. Make me anima vinculum. Give me the strength and abilities to fight beside you as an equal. Together, we might survive what we can't survive separately. Elena, no. That's not. We agreed to wait. That was before Lord Corvin gave us a deadline. She squeezed his hands. You said repeated blood exchange creates the bond. How many exchanges? How long? Lucian closed his eyes. 3 exchanges over 3 nights creates an anima vinculum bond. But Elena, the transformation is painful. Your body has to adapt to vampire blood flowing through your veins, rewriting your cells. I can handle pain, Elena interrupted. I've been handling it for years. But I can't handle standing by while you sacrifice everything you are to protect me. I won't be that person, Lucian. I won't be the weakness that breaks you. You're not weakness, he said roughly. You're the first thing that's felt like strength in decades. But this bonding you fully, making you anima vinculum, it's irreversible. You'll be tied to me until one of us dies. You'll age slowly, live for centuries, exist in the spaces between human and vampire, with no place in either world with you, Elena said firmly. I'll exist with you. That's enough. That's everything. Lucian stared at her, and through the bond, she felt his resistance crumbling beneath the weight of his affection, his desperation, his need to believe they could survive this together. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it tonight. 3 exchanges over 3 nights means we need to start now to be ready before Corvin's deadline. Then let's start. Elena, stop trying to protect me from my own choices. She pulled him close, until their foreheads touched. I love you. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you, and I choose us over every safe, empty alternative. So please, please, trust me enough to let me fight beside you. The words hung between them like a vow. Lucian's hands came up to frame her face, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears, the one bodily function he'd told her that vampires retained. You love me, he whispered, as if testing the words. Yes, I love you too, he confessed. So much it terrifies me, so much I'd burn the world to keep you safe. And that's why he kissed her, deep and desperate. That's why I'll give you this. The bond, the strength, everything I have. And together, we'll show Corvin what House Ashford truly stands for. Elena smiled against his lips. No surrender, no surrender, Lucian agreed. He led her to his chambers in the cellar, a room she'd never seen, lined with dark wood and lit by candlelight. The bed was ancient, draped in silk, the color of midnight. He sat her down gently, then knelt before her with old-fashioned courtesy. 3 nights, he said. 3 exchanges. By the 3rd night, you'll be anima vinculum, bound to me in ways that transcend mortality. Are you ready? Elena offered him her wrist. I've been ready since the moment you heard me scream, Lucian's fangs descended, and as he bit down, Elena felt the bond between them surge and deepen, not just connection now, but fusion. His strength flowed into her veins like liquid fire, burning and transforming, rewriting her from the inside out. It hurt. God, it hurt, but through the pain, she felt Lucian's love wrapping around her like armor, and she knew they would survive this. They would survive everything, together.